I'll be discussing the anesthetic management of the posterior fossa tumor. So first of all, to understand what makes the posterior fossa different, we have to understand its anatomy. So the portion of the intracranial part that is below the tentorium cerebelli constitutes a posterior fossa, that is the infratentorial compartment. It is bounded anteriorly by the dorsum sella and the petrous part of the temporal bones, posteriorly by the squamous part of the occipital bones. The roof is formed by the unyielding tentorium cerebelli and the floor is formed by the occipital and the petrous bones. So this area, although it's a large cavity, but still it's an unyielding and a very tightly packed cavity. It contains midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata, the cranial nerves 3rd to 12th, the various sigmoid, transverse, and the occipital venous sinuses, the ventricular system comprising of narrow cerebral aqueduct and the 4th ventricle, as well as the major blood vessels. It also contains the reticular activating system, which is responsible for our consciousness. Many vital centers, those controlling the cardiovascular system, the respiratory center, swallowing, coughing, they are all located in the posterior fossa. So any small increase in the intracranial pressure within this cavity can have devastating effect. It can cause a structural damage as well as increase the mortality and the morbidity of this patient. So coming to a case scenario, we have a 19 years old young male admitted with chief complaints of difficulty in walking for last 1 month, nasal regurgitation of fluids for last 2 months, headache with vomiting for last 3 months. So from the chief complaints, we can see the patient has difficulty in walking. So it can be either sensory or the motor ataxia. The nasal regurgitation of fluids, it indicates towards the involvement of the lower cranial nerves, and headache with vomiting, which are the manifestations of the raised intracranial pressure. So most likely from the chief complaints, we can make it out, it's an intracranial SOL or the intracranial pathology, I would say, and likely to be in the infratentorial compartment. So what else we want to elicit? The other signs and symptoms which we have to see, the features of raised ICP and the presence of hydrocephalus. Does the patient has headache, nausea, vomiting, drowsiness, and blurred vision? The cerebellar signs, does the patient has dysdiadokinesia, nystagmus, ataxia, dysmetria, features of 3rd to 12th cranial nerve involvement, any motor weakness or the sensory involvement. So we have to see all these things in our history and during examination. So for confirmation of the diagnosis, we have to get the CT image of the head or the MRI. So these are the MRI images, the sagittal sections showing a posterior fossa tumor. You can see this is a cerebellar SOL. And this is another image showing the posterior fossa SOL likely to be a brainstem glioma, which is pushing the cerebellum outwards. So both these are situated in the posterior fossa, that is below the infratentorial compartment. This is a picture showing the coronal and the sagittal section of the pineal gland tumor. Although it is not strictly a posterior fossa tumor, but the approach is usually the infratentorial and the supracerebellar approach. So the anesthetic concerns and the surgical concerns remain the same as in the posterior fossa patient. So what are the challenges associated while dealing with such patients? So we have already discussed that there are many vital structures which are situated in a confined space. So it can lead to very rapid increase in the intracranial pressure and brainstem herniation. These patients are usually operated in non-supine positions, either sitting position, the lateral position, the prone or the semi-prone positions, and it has its own anesthetic challenges. The patient might have hydrocephalus. The operating in non-supine position increases the risk of development of venous air embolism and pneumocephalus, which poses challenge to the anesthesiologist. And these patients usually have a very protracted post-operative course, usually requiring long-term mechanical ventilation and even tracheostomy in the post-operative period. So during the pre-anesthetic considerations, always see for the brainstem or the cranial nerve dysfunction in these patients. See whether the patient has elevated intracranial pressure and whether any shunting procedure has been done pre-operatively. Assess the risk for the blood loss, discuss with the surgeon and arrange adequate blood cross-matching and grouping should be done beforehand. Ask the surgeon which position he would operate in and accordingly make the OT ready for such position. assess the risk of the venous air embolism depending upon the position the surgeon is asking for and the monitors you will be using intraoperatively. Ask the surgeon whether he'll be requiring doing any other special monitoring such as facial nerve monitoring or the evoked potential monitoring, and accordingly we have to modify the anesthetic regimen accordingly as per the monitoring technique. So our goals of anesthesia should be to maintain the cerebral perfusion pressure and stable hemodynamics, proper and safe positioning of the patient. We should take all the measures to prevent, early detect, and prompt treatment of venous air embolism. We have to facilitate electrophysiological monitoring intraoperatively, and we should aim for early and smooth emergence. In the pre-medication, usually we avoid sedatives in posterior fossa tumor patient because it not only impairs assessment of neurological status, but it also might cause respiratory depression, further increasing the intracranial pressure. Anti-salogogs may be given and they are quite helpful when you are positioning the patient other than supine. It will prevent the endotracheal tube from the dislodgement by avoiding the wetting of the tapes and the securing tapes. So induction and maintenance, we take a wide bore venous line, attach all the non-invasive standard ASA monitors. The induction and the intubation is standard as Dr. Rudrashish has already discussed for any neurosurgical patient. For these patients, for posterior fossa tumor, usually the neck is extremely flexed. So we usually use a flexometallic tube so that the portex tube does not get kinked. So we use a flexometallic tube. Maintenance is on oxygen or nitrous. Oxygen and nitrous, volatile or TIVA can be used in addition to fentanyl and muscle relaxant. So this maintenance of anesthesia has to be titrated according to the additional monitoring that you are using intraoperatively. The other monitors that we use are the arterial line for the beat-to-beat measurement of arterial blood pressure, as well as for intermittent ABG sampling. But always remember that the transducer has to be zeroed at the level of the tragus, so that to give an adequate measurement of cerebral perfusion pressure. The central venous line is inserted in almost all the patients because these surgeries are usually long-lasting, and also if we might need to aspirate the air, we need a central venous line in place. Monitors for the VAE, if the patient is being operated in sitting position, the different monitors for VAE should be inserted. I'll be coming to this later. The other electrophysiological monitoring such as motor evoked potential monitoring, somatosensory evoked potential monitoring, and the brainstem evoked potential monitoring might be used intraoperatively. So we can see that in this patient, we are inserting a TE probe. This patient has to be operated in a sitting position. And because of the risk of the VA associated, we have decided to insert a TEE probe. So TE probe is, after insertion, we focus on the bicable view or the fourth ventricle view. So this also helps in the right positioning of the CVP catheter. As we can see in the right atrium, we can see a speck dot. So by this TE, we can also confirm the right position of the CVP catheter, which should be just below the RA and the SVC junction. The other uses are for, we can also diagnose the patent foramen ovale intraoperatively also with the help of TE. As far for the JR levels, I'll not be going into the details for this. So what are the advantages of the sitting position? The main advantages of the sitting position is that it causes the gravitational drainage of the CSF as well as a venous blood flow from the operative field. So this results in a cleaner field for the surgeon and there is better hemostasis. The other advantages are there is improved surgical exposure, there is improved access to the tracheal tube, chest wall and arms for the anesthesiologist. The FRC is increased because the diaphragm moves downwards. So we have free diaphragmatic movements and and there is increase in the FRCs. We can also observe the phase for neuromonitoring and this results in a shorter surgical time, although the time taken for positioning increases, but yet the surgical time is less. And there is decrease in the intracranial pressure because of the better drainage. So the physiological changes, there are many, some are advantageous and some are not. So coming to the central nervous system, compared to the supine position, in the sitting position, the ICP decreases, as I've already discussed, because of the better drainage, gravitational drainage of the CSF in the blood, the ICP decreases. The CPP is maintained as such. But we also should also know any hypotension in the sitting position can result in cerebral ischemia. So we have to be very careful of maintaining the blood pressures. In the cardiovascular system, because of the venous pooling in the limbs, there is decrease in the venous return, decrease in the cardiac output. So the heart rate increases and the systolic blood pressure and the mean arterial pressure decreases. In the respiratory system, the total lung capacity increases, the V by Q mismatch decreases, and there is less atelectasis in the lungs. So the benefits are it has low ICP, minimal bleeding compared to the prone position, and better access to the airway. However, the risk involved in the sitting position are the venous air embolism, the paradoxical embolism, development of hypotension, pneumocephalus, paraplegia, quadriplegia, and macroglossia. So the contraindications to sitting position are the presence of a ventricular-atrial shunt and cerebral insufficiency when upright. Large patent foramen ovale and extremes of age are also contraindications. So while positioning, few things we have to keep in mind. So to prevent the venous pooling, we have to we apply the DVT pumps beforehand, preload the patient with 8 to 10 ml of crystalloid before positioning. And whenever you position, it should be very graded and slow with alternate movements of the head end and the leg end of the table. And also ensure that there is minimal blackout. That is, the time when the patient is unmonitored, when the monitors are detached, should be minimal. It is better to keep an arterial line in position while positioning so that you are able to monitor the blood pressures. Also, while flexing the neck, ensure that there are 2 finger breadth space between the chin and the sternum to avoid any increase in the venous pressure and the endotracheal tube kinking. Keep an eye on the airway pressures also when the surgeon is positioning the patient. While applying the head clamp, give some local anesthesia at the site of pin insertion to blunt the noxious stimulus. So usually this is the how the patient looks after he's placed supine, placed in the sitting position. So as you can see, the chin is flexed. Ensure 2 fingers breadth between the chin and the sternum. Ensure that all the pressure points are padded. The sciatic nerve, the common peroneal nerve, these are very prone to injury. So we have to take care and adequately pad them. Avoid hyperflexion of the at the hips. Ensure shoulders are supported so that the brachial plexus doesn't get injured. And a very important thing, after the final positioning, always auscultate for the bilateral air entry. Because of the extreme neck flexion, the endotracheal tube might move endobronchially. So adjust your TE probe, adjust your endotracheal tube and reconfirm before giving the patient over to surgeon. So this is how the OT looks, and you can see the pressure transducer has been zeroed at the level of the tragus. So there's very little space left for the anesthesiologist to work in such scenarios. So all of a sudden we see that the ETCO2 falls from 35 to 30. So what do we suspect? So it might be a venous air embolism. What is VAE? It is a sudden and sustained decrease in the ETCO2 of 3 to 5 mmHg in the absence of any change in the minute ventilation. So how does it manifest? The early changes will be, there will be fall in ETCO2, while if you do an ABG, there will be increase in the PaCO2. This is because of the pulmonary air, which causes the V by Q mismatch. So there will be hypercarbia. Hypoxemia is usually a later sign. There will be development of pulmonary hypertension, and in extreme cases, pulmonary edema might occur. In the cardiovascular system, there can be hypotension or hypertension, dysarrhythmias, changes in the heart sounds. We'll be able to see hear a mill-wheel murmur on if a Doppler is in place. There may be ECG evidence of ischemia. In the central nervous system, there might be hyperemia and brain swelling. So what are the different monitors for VAE? This chart you can find in every book, so I'll not be going into details. So just highlighting the salient points. T is the most sensitive invasive monitor, while precaudal Doppler is the most sensitive non-invasive monitor. T can detect tear in the left side of the heart also. The capnography is a very cost-effective monitor and it can detect all the hemodynamically significant VAE. So at many centers, those centers which don't have TE or the precaudal Doppler, they rely on capnography only. End-tidal nitrogen is the most specific monitor. You should remember these 4-5 points which I've told you. So the treatment you will be asked, if you get this case, it should be on your tips. So intraoperative, inform the surgeon immediately, discontinue nitrous oxide immediately, ask the surgeon to flood the surgical field with fluids, provide bilateral jugular vein compression, aspirate from right atrial catheter and give supportive treatment. So what are the complications, other complications of the sitting position? So patient, any hypotension can have deleterious effect because of accentuated effect. It can result in cerebral ischemia. So you have to be very careful. There can be pneumocephalus and tension pneumocephalus, macroglossia because of the impairment of the venous drainage and the lymphatic drainage from the face because of extreme flexion of the neck. There can be quadriplegia in this patient because of extreme neck flexion and mechanical compression of the cord. So in the pre-op period, if the patient is scheduled for sitting craniotomy, so ensure that the cervical spine is also normal. Rule out any pathology of the cervical spine also. And peripheral nerve injuries can also occur. So this is the other positions used for posterior fossa tumor surgery are the prone position. So all the pressure points should be padded as for any other surgery. See the neck flexion for the posterior fossa, ensure 2-finger breadth space between these 2 points and ensure that the abdomen is free. There should be no pressure, otherwise the respiration will be hampered as well as there will be increased bleeding because of the venous engorgement. The other, the park bench position, all the positioning principles are same for all the position. But ensure in this park bench position or the lateral position that you place an axillary roll beneath the lower chest. It should be, the axilla should be free so that there should be no any brachial plexus injury. It should be placed in the lower axilla. Also, for any position, ensure that your endotracheal tube and your IV lines, arterial lines, CVP lines, and all the monitors are attached securely. Maintenance of anesthesia. The anesthesia can be maintained on TIVA or inhalational, but it has been found that the threshold for transpulmonary passage of venous air is higher during anesthesia with intravenous anesthesia compared with halothane. And if the surgeon is intending for evoked potential monitoring, we prefer TIVA. PEEP may increase the likelihood of PAE after venous air embolism has occurred. It has no role in the prevention of venous air embolism, and many centers keep a PEEP of around 5 mmHg. There is no concrete evidence of avoiding it. But yes, if VAE has occurred, please avoid PEEP. Nitrous oxide for posterior fossa tumor, it can be used safely in the sitting position neurosurgery till the end. There are 2 concerns for the development of VAE and the pneumocephalus. But for the VAE, nitrous oxide has not been implicated to increase the morbidity. But one has to be watchful, and if venous air embolism occurs, we have to switch it as soon as it occurs. For the pneumocephalus, there is no concrete evidence that it should be continued till end or it should be discontinued before the dura closure. And it has been seen that incorporation of nitrous oxide has no substantial effect on amount of intracranial air detected after posterior fossa procedures performed in seated patients. Emergence and extubation. For such patients, assess the preoperative consciousness. The decision to extubate the patient depends upon all these factors, whether the patient had intact consciousness, what was the state of the lower cranial nerves, what was the intraoperative course, was there any brainstem handling. Depending upon these issues, we take a decision whether the patient will be ventilated or not. So these patients often, if they have impaired lower cranial nerve injury, lower cranial nerves, or neurologically, they were not fully conscious preoperatively or had raised intracranial pressure. So we go for postoperative mechanical ventilation in these patients. And often those patients who have lower cranial nerves involved, impaired gag reflex, impaired cuff reflex, these patients are also tracheostomized. So the other postoperative complications, pneumocephalus, hematoma, postoperative nausea, vomiting, pain. Pain is more as compared to the supratentorial procedures because of extensive muscle cutting. hydrocephalus, respiratory, swallowing, and cardiovascular disorders, because the vital centers are located in the posterior fossa. So coming to the pneumocephalus, so the patient may present as delayed recovery. If we are trying to extubate the patient might not wake up. So we should suspect that patient may have pneumocephalus, especially if he has been operated in sitting position. He may have headache, neurological deficit, confusion, agitation, and seizures. So this is a scan showing the development of the tension pneumocephalus, where the cerebral hemispheres are being compressed and tenting of cerebral hemispheres has occurred. This is known as Mount Fuji sign. So the treatment is high flow oxygen, and in case it's a tension pneumocephalus, burhole and aspiration of air should be done. To conclude, posterior fossa surgery is a challenging job, and we should follow basic principles of neuroanesthesia. The positioning should be very safe, and we should remain vigilant for intraoperative complications and should know how to promptly manage these complications.